This is a Seabreeze model SF10T fan heater. I found this in a thrift store back in the summertime. I paid, I forget, probably like $5 for it. This is my second Seabreeze heater. I've made a video of one a couple of years ago. Here's that, my Seabreeze SF8. And this is the SF10T. This one's slightly newer, probably from the 2000s. I like these Seabreeze fan heaters just because they're kind of interesting. Seabreeze is a Canadian company, and all their products, including this, were made in Canada. This heater was made in Canada out of all Canadian-made components. Most of the components in this heater fan were made by Seabreeze themselves. That's part of what makes Seabreeze such an interesting company, is they're very vertically integrated. They not only assemble their products in Canada, but they make the components inside their products also in Canada. They have a manufacturing facility in Toronto, Ontario. So I always find these Seabreeze heater fans very interesting. You don't see them an awful lot because they're expensive. These Seabreeze heater fans are usually like $30-40, whereas now these days you can get something made by Holmes or Airworks for $10, and it does the exact same job just as well. Although these are made in Canada, as I mentioned in my last video about the Seabreeze SF8, I don't find these to be really any higher quality than any heaters made in China, which is kind of too bad. As a matter of fact, this example that I bought, I've actually modified it. The thermostat was bad, dangerously so. The thermostat had melted part of itself apart, and when the heater was running, the thermostat would be constantly sparking and arcing at the contacts. So I actually removed the thermostat in this, and I bypassed it. So the switch is still here, but you can see it just spins round and round. It's just a decoration now. The thermostat itself is gone, and I just bypassed it. I bridged over it. This is newer than my SF8. This was made probably in the 2000s. Like all of Seabreeze's products, they made this model for years and years, from what research I can find. They introduced this model around 2003, and they continued manufacturing it until around 2014. So this had a decade lifespan. Speaking of Seabreeze though, they were alive and well when I made the video of the SF8 a couple of years ago, but I think they're out of business now. I don't think Seabreeze exists anymore. Their website, seabreeze.ca, has been down since July of 2019. And just before starting this video, I went to the Internet Archive, dug up the latest version of their website, and I called all 3 telephone numbers that are listed on their Contact Us page. One is a fax number, the other 2 are voice numbers. All 3 numbers are down. All of them you get a "this number is not in service" message. So between that and the website being down, I don't think Seabreeze exists anymore, which is really surprising. They just seem to be such a stronghold. They existed for 75 years. And now they're just gone. I almost I almost wonder if my last video I made of them, where I sort of bashed the quality of them for being Canadian made and how much they cost, I almost wonder if that video contributed to their demise. But unless something's up and all their numbers and their website's just down for some reason, it seems that Seabreeze International Corporation of Mississauga, Ontario, no longer exists after 75 years. If that's the case, that's kind of too bad, but not surprising when their products cost several times more than the competition for something that's about as good. And a lot of their products had kind of poor reviews for quality, just sort of not that great build quality. So I guess rip in peace, Seabreeze, if that's really the case. Now on to this heater. As I said, I found this in a thrift store. The thermostat was dangerously faulty. If that was the case when the original owner donated it, I think that's really terrible of them to donate it. They should have just chucked it, but no matter. It landed in my hands. I just removed the thermostat, bypassed it, and it's a perfectly safe and usable heater now. It just doesn't have a thermostat. This is one of the models that has the ThermaFlow, which was a technology that Seabreeze themselves patented. And I've actually read the patent, and I just read it before starting this video, and it works in an incredibly clever and unique way, and I assumed it worked a completely different way. So what the ThermaFlow is this thing has two heat modes. High is 1500 watts, low is 1000 watts. But the ThermaFlow technology is that on low mode, the fan spins slower. The purpose of that is to make the air coming out of the heater feel just as hot on low mode as it feels on high mode, thereby saving energy costs because you're more likely to run the heater on low. Whereas normal fan heaters, they'll have 2 or 3 heat settings, but the fan runs at full speed on all 3 settings. So on my SF8, for example, which has a 500 watt mode, the air is barely lukewarm coming out of it because the fan's running at full speed. And, you know, who wants to turn on a heater and then get lukewarm air? Well, with the ThermaFlow, because the fan slows down, the air exiting the heater is just as hot on low as it is on high. There's just not as much air coming out. But you can still feel the heat, which is what's important. So they actually patented this. They filed the patent in 2001. They were granted it in 2003. And I have yet to see any other fan heaters that use something like this. So it really is unique to Seabreeze. But here's what's really cool about it. First of all, I'm going to turn this on here. I'm going to start it on high speed. And it's a fan heater. Nice heat. There's the profile of it. Not as bulky as the SF8. Now you'll notice a total of 3 indicator lights going on here. These are all neon lights, which is cool. This just means on or off. The green light originally would come on when the thermostat was on, and then when the set temperature was reached and the thermostat clicked off, this indicator would go out, but this one would stay on. So this was a heater is running indicator. Because I bypassed the thermostat, I just rewired this so it lights up all the time. This indicator turns on when you're on high heat. If you're on low heat, this indicator goes out. So I'll switch it to low heat. And you can hear now, the fan has slowed down significantly. It's much quieter, which was another benefit of the ThermaFlow technology. But to me, the heat coming out feels just as hot because of the less airflow. But we are running at 1000 watts instead of 1500 watts now. So very, very cool. Standard metal 2-blade fan. And you can see the heating coils going round and round in a spiral pattern. Now, here is what's super cool about the ThermaFlow system. I had assumed that how it works is when you put it in the low mode, it connects the fan motor across part of the heating element. The heating element is just a resistor, so connect the fan across a portion of that element, and you have a portion of the 120 volts going to the fan motor. So fan motor gets lower voltage. But that is completely not how it works. In fact, this uses a completely unique fan motor. It's just, I never even considered this to be a possibility, and now I see why they patented it. It's just so clever and unique. So here's the deal. The fan motor does not run at 120 volts. At all times, the fan motor is actually run in series with the heating element. The fan motor is wound with really thick gauge wire and only a few turns, only 50 turns according to the patent. If we look back here, you might be able to see some of the turns of the fan motor there. Look how thick the wire is. That is unusual for a fan motor, super thick. And that's because the fan motor is wired in series with the heating element, so it bears the brunt of the current going through the heating element. So the fan speed is controlled not by voltage, but by current. So when you're running on high mode, there is literally 12.5 amps running through the fan motor. And so the voltage across the fan motor must be very, very small, maybe only 10 or 20 volts. So this is a 10 or 20 volt at 12.5 amp fan motor, a low voltage, high current fan motor. And then on the low heat mode, the 500 watt heating coil is disconnected from power, leaving only the 1000 watt coil connected to power. And so there's only, 8 or 9 amps going through the fan motor, which causes it to slow down. Incredibly unique system. I didn't even know it was practical to make a fan motor that operated in this way. It's super cool. So why do this instead of just using an ordinary fan motor connected across a portion of the heating element in the low mode? Well, first of all, it simplifies manufacturing. You can use a simpler switch because you don't have to switch between the fan being connected straight to power and the fan being connected across part of the heating coil. So you save a bit of manufacturing costs there. It also saves manufacturing costs because a fan motor of this type is cheaper to manufacture. You have less turns of wire, and the wire is much thicker, so it's cheaper and easier to manufacture than an ordinary fan motor with many turns of really fine gauge wire. According to Seabreeze's patent, this also makes the fan motor more durable, less likely to have a failure due to the coil. So the big reason for their design choice was to save costs, according to their patent. But yeah, super cool. I never would have guessed that it works this way. I would open this thing up and use a multimeter to see just how much voltage is running across the fan motor. But once you take this thing apart, it's kind of tricky to get back together because these pilot light lenses and this faceplate and stuff like that, and the thermostat switch, that all sort of falls out, and you have to loosely put it back together and hope it stays in place when you put the heater back together. So I'm not gonna take it apart. So yeah, that's the gist of how this thing operates. Kind of a nice feature. It's got a little cord storage here. There's enough space in there to store the entire cord and the plug. The SF10T was the successor to the SF10, which was the same thing but without the thermoflow. Instead, it just had the standard 500, 1000, 1500 watt settings where the fan runs at full speed every time. And although the SF10T was discontinued in 2014, it was replaced by a model almost identical called the SF8T. The SF8T is functionally exactly the same. The only difference is it's black instead of white. And instead of this little cord storage compartment, it just has standard feet and no means to store the cord. So the SF8T is the successor to this. But after this was discontinued, Seabreeze did make the SF10TA, which replaced the thermoflow with their new technology that they came out with later called Smart Thermoflow. And I don't know how Smart Thermoflow works, but what it does is it selects the proper heating level, low or high, automatically. So there's no low-high switch for Smart Thermoflow, you just have the power switch and the thermostat. I'm hoping someday I can get a hold of a Seabreeze Smart Thermoflow heater and see what it's like. Although by the looks of it, the only chance of that now is going to be finding one in a thrift store or on eBay, because apparently you're not going to be able to buy any new anymore. All in all, that's about all there is to it. It's a simple heater fan. It's cool because it's Canadian made, and the thermoflow technology's pretty interesting. It's not really any better quality than something you'd get from China. But it's an honest product from a company that has very recently, apparently, gone out of business. But I think it's a cool fan heater. I'm glad I was able to save it from the landfill by removing the thermostat. I'd like to see if maybe someday I can get another thermostat from like another dead fan heater, stick it in there and just sort of make it work with this switch. But we'll see. But for now, it's working as a perfectly fine thermostat-less heater, much like my SF8, which never had a thermostat on it to begin with. But there you go. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.